My name is Isabella Rowan, and I used to believe that staying quiet made life easier, like holding your breath underwater, so no one notices the ripples. For years, that belief sat inside me like a stone, heavy and familiar. It shaped the way I walked, the way I worked, the way I learned to take up as little space as possible. And maybe that's why the moment everything shifted felt so unnervingly simple. Just me, standing in a tiny attic apartment in Portland, Maine, staring at a window I had never dared to open. You wouldn't think a window could change anything. But the thing about small, quiet choices is that they collect. They build. They wait. A thin line of morning light slipped through the dusty glass, glowing like a promise no one had spoken aloud. I had lived in that apartment for 4 years, and somehow the window had always felt symbolic. Or maybe I avoided touching it because I knew, deep down, what it represented. Dare I wasn't sure I deserved. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Delivery trucks hummed. A dog barked somewhere below. A cyclist's bell chimed lightly. People were already in motion while I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the latch. It's strange. The things we let control us. A job, a voice, a memory. Sometimes a version of ourselves we should have outgrown years ago. For me, it was a combination all woven around a childhood shaped by "don't make it harder, don't provoke," and the subtle, suffocating message that girls like me should be agreeable, reliable, and unbothered. But that morning, something inside me felt different. Not loud, not dramatic, just restless. Like a tide finally coming in. I opened the window. A small rush of cold autumn air spilled in, filling the room with the smell of damp leaves and ocean salt. It was such an ordinary thing, but the wind on my face felt like remembering something I'd forgotten I knew. My lungs expanded slowly, as if for learning how to claim space. Below, a woman in a green coat walked by, sipping coffee and laughing loudly into her phone. Her voice echoed up the street, vibrant and unapologetic. I envied her for a moment, not because she was beautiful or confident, but because she let herself be heard without shrinking. I didn't know it yet, but opening that window was the first step toward the life I would eventually choose. A life that didn't ask me to fold myself smaller. I got ready for work the same way I always did, except everything felt slightly misaligned, as though my body was still adjusting to the idea that change was possible. At the advertising agency where I worked as a junior designer, the office smelled of burnt coffee and printer ink, the fragrance of unspoken frustration. My supervisor, Jana, was the kind of woman who had mastered the art of slicing through people with compliments. "You're dependable, Isabella," she would say. "Quiet, efficient. You don't start trouble." For the longest time, I mistook those words for praise. Being small kept me safe. Being unnoticed kept me liked. But the truth is, being invisible is its own kind of burden, and it wears you down quietly until one day you can't hold it anymore. That day was beginning to feel like it was coming. At my desk, I stared at the half-finished design on my screen, some campaign for a perfume. That promised lightness. My cursor blinked like a heartbeat. I traced the outline of the bottle absent-mindedly, feeling more disconnected from my work than usual. Joni appeared behind me, tapping her nails on the back of my chair. "Isabella, the client wants more sparkle, more glamour, less whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at my design, her smile polite and dismissive at the same time. "I can revise it," I said softly. "You always do," she replied. That was the moment something inside me twitched, not fully awake, but stretching. A quiet resistance, like a muscle I had forgotten I had. During lunch, I walked to the waterfront. The sky was gray, low, and heavy, but the water shimmered with a stubborn sort of light. I sat on a bench near the docks, surrounded by the smell of seaweed and gasoline, and tried to breathe past the tightening in my chest. I had been living like this for so long, careful, contained, predictable. My world was a loop of safe decisions, the same cafe, the same routes, the same people I never allowed close enough to hurt me. But the truth I kept avoiding was this: I wasn't safe. I was stuck. A seagull landed on the railing in front of me, cocking its head as if studying me. There was something unintentionally comical about its tilted gaze, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed quietly, but genuinely. The bird blinked at me, unimpressed. The breeze picked up, lifting strands of my hair. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves hit the rocks. There was a rhythm to it, something steady, patient, and ancient. Something that reminded me of childhood summers on Cape Cod with my aunt, when the world felt wide and possible. I didn't realize how long I'd been sitting there until my phone buzzed with a message from Jana. Need those revisions ASAP. The irritation in those 4 words stirred something again. Not anger, more like disappointment in myself for always reacting instead of choosing. As I walked back to the office, my steps felt heavier but clearer. The window I opened that morning was still sitting in the back of my mind, like a flickering lighthouse, small, but impossible to ignore. By the time I returned to my desk, a decision was already forming, still shapeless, like fog before it becomes rain, but real enough to change the way I held my shoulders. I revised the design. I sent it in. I answered emails. But all day, my focus was split between my tasks and the quiet, insistent tug inside me. It felt like someone knocking gently from the inside, asking to be acknowledged. When I finally walked home in the evening, the city lights shimmered across the wet pavement. The air smelled of impending rain. As I climbed the creaky stairs to my apartment, I felt something unexpected. Anticipation. My room greeted me with the same familiarity as always, the lamp with the crooked shade, the stack of books I never finished, the window I had finally opened. I walked toward it without thinking. Outside, the night was calm, dark, and full of invisible possibilities. A faint breeze entered through the gap, brushing my cheek in a way that felt almost intentional. I touched the wooden frame gently, my fingertips tracing the grain. And in that quiet moment, with the city humming beneath me and the autumn air filling my lungs, I realized this wasn't about a window. This was about waking up to myself, to my hunger, to a life I had kept on pause. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It thrilled me. The next morning began with rain, soft, hesitant, and almost apologetic, tapping against the attic window I'd left open overnight. I awoke to the cool breeze brushing my face and the faint scent of wet pine, drifting in from the street below. My blanket had twisted around me, as if even in sleep I had been wrestling with something invisible. I sat up slowly. The room felt different. Not changed, exactly, but charged, like the moment before an orchestra begins to play. When the silence is thick with waiting. For the first few minutes, I just listened. To the rain. To my heartbeat. To the quiet hum of possibility that had settled somewhere behind my ribs. It should have been an ordinary morning, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. I made tea and stood by the open window, letting the cool mist cling to my skin. People on the street hurried beneath umbrellas, moving with the kind of purpose I'd never really learned to embody. I watched them with a strange, softened curiosity, like I was observing a world I had been part of but never fully present in. I still didn't know what exactly had shifted inside me the day before, but the sensation was back again, restless, insistent, like a tide pushing against old walls. I arrived at the office 10 minutes earlier than usual, which startled Jana enough for her eyebrows to lift as I walked past her glass-walled office. "You're early," she said, tone neutral but edges sharp. "It happens sometimes." I replied with a smile that surprised both of us. She blinked, thrown off by my unexpected lightness. For years, I had been predictable, the quiet one, the agreeable one, the one who didn't challenge anything unless absolutely necessary. The version of me she thought she knew was someone who didn't show up early, didn't laugh easily, and definitely didn't open windows just because she felt like breathing differently. But that wasn't me anymore. Not entirely. I sat at my desk, the hum of computers settling around me like background static. My design files were waiting, the same perfume campaign, the same unrealistic expectations, the same unspoken pressure to be perfect without ever being praised for it. And yet, I felt a little braver than yesterday, just enough to notice how small my world had become. Midway through the morning, an unexpected message popped up on my screen from Elias, one of the senior illustrators. He wasn't someone I interacted with much. He worked in the corner office layered with sketches, watercolor swatches, and half-finished concepts taped to the walls. "Elias, saw your initial perfume layout. The soft gold lighting. That was beautiful. Thought you should know." I froze. Compliments in this office usually came wrapped in critiques, or whispered like secrets. But this was simple, sincere, unpolished. It landed inside me with an unfamiliar weight. I typed back, "Thank you." I wasn't sure anyone noticed that part. His reply came almost instantly. "People notice more than they say, especially the quiet details." A strange warmth spread through my chest, not romantic, not dramatic, just human. The kind of warmth you feel when someone sees a part of you you didn't think was visible. It made me wonder what else I had been hiding, even from myself. At lunch, instead of sitting alone at my desk or pretending to be busy editing fonts, I ventured outside again. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, draping the streets in a soft gray glow. The waterfront was quieter than the day before, fewer people, more fog. The world blurred at the edges like a watercolor painting left in the rain. I walked along the boardwalk, my hands tucked into my coat pockets. My boots clicked softly on the damp wood. Seagulls cried overhead, their wings slicing through the air. Every step felt slower, more intentional, as if I were learning how to move through the world not as someone avoiding notice, but as someone observing, choosing, existing openly. I found a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a pottery shop, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. On impulse, I went in. The bell above the door chimed, releasing a wave of coffee and vanilla into the air. The barista smiled at me, not the hurried, forced kind of smile I was used to, but something gentle. "What can I get started for you?" she asked. I stared at the chalkboard menu for a moment, then ordered something I'd never tried before. A lavender honey latte. It felt like a small rebellion, choosing something unfamiliar without overthinking it. I sat by the window, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass. The latte arrived in a ceramic mug painted with tiny blue waves. When I took the first sip, the warmth spread through me like sunlight. Sweet, floral, surprising. I didn't realize I was smiling until I saw my reflection faintly in the glass. For years, I'd been living the same day over and over. And yet here, I was ordering something I'd never tasted, opening windows I used to fear, engaging with people I once avoided, letting the world brush up against me instead of shrinking away. Maybe change didn't have to be a storm. Maybe it could be a series of small, soft decisions. As I finished my latte, my phone buzzed again, another message from Elias. "Elias, I'm planning a concept board for a new pitch. If you're free later, I'd love your eyes on it. You have a subtle instinct for tone." I stared at the message, stunned by how easily he said it. Instinct, as if I had something worth contributing. I typed slowly, "I like that. Just let me know when." When I returned to the office, the day continued as usual: deadlines, chatter, tasks. But I was different. Every interaction felt slightly shifted, as if the world was tilting toward clarity. At 4:30, Elias waved me into his workspace. His office smelled faintly of graphite and citrus, the walls covered in sketches that looked like they'd stepped out of dreams. He talked me through his concepts, his voice calm, thoughtful, genuine. At one point he said, "You don't give yourself enough credit, Isabella. Your work has a kind of quiet confidence to it." Quiet confidence. I had never paired those two words before. When I left his office, something inside me felt lighter, like the release of a breath I'd been unknowingly holding for years. The walk home that evening was different from the night before. The rain had stopped, and the pavement glistened beneath the streetlights. A faint breeze carried the scent of pine and chimney smoke. The city felt alive, but for once, so did I. Back in my attic apartment, I found myself standing by the open window again, watching the sky settle into a deep blue twilight. I whispered into the quiet air, not expecting an answer. "I want more than this." The wind moved gently through the room, cool and affirming, like it had been listening all along. The next morning didn't begin with rain or sunlight. It began with a strange clarity, the kind that wakes you before your alarm and leaves you lying there, staring at the ceiling, sensing something unnamed has shifted further. I lay in bed listening to the hum of the old radiator and the faint rustle of wind outside my open window. For years, mornings were things I drifted through slow, heavy, shapeless. But today felt sharper, more defined, as though the world had outlined itself in thin ink. I got dressed slowly, choosing a soft beige sweater I usually reserved for days I wanted to hide. But when I looked in the mirror, the color didn't make me look small. It made me look warm, present, like a person stepping into herself rather than away from herself. On my way to work, I stopped by the bakery near my street, the one I used to avoid, because it was always crowded with people who seemed so comfortable being alive. The scent of warm cinnamon drifted out onto the sidewalk. Without overthinking, I walked in. The barista, young guy with freckles and a tired smile, asked, "What can I get for you?" And for the second day in a row, I surprised myself. "A cinnamon cardamom roll," I said, "and a black coffee." Black coffee. I hadn't ordered that since college. The warmth of the cup seeped into my palms as I walked the rest of the way to the office. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was participating in my own life, not just observing it. When I rode the elevator up, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. There was something steady in my gaze now. Not confidence exactly, but something on the way to it. As I stepped into the office, I noticed Elias leaning against the wall near the design studio, flipping through his sketchbook. When he saw me, he straightened slightly, just enough to signal that he'd been waiting. "Morning," he said, voice warm but casual. "Morning," I replied, and it felt natural, not forced, not small. He walked beside me to the break area where he poured himself tea from a tin labeled Earl Grey. The scent of bergamot floated in the air. "I meant what I said yesterday," he added quietly. "You should contribute more. You have instinct." It still felt strange, hearing it out loud. "I'm not sure Jana sees it that way," I said. He gave a half smile. "Jana sees what keeps things predictable. You might be outgrowing predictable." His words hit me softly but deeply. Outgrowing predictable. It wasn't praise. It was permission. The morning passed in a blur of revisions and client calls. But underneath it all was that quiet thread of possibility, weaving itself through every thought. At noon, I walked to the waterfront again, not to escape the office, but because I wanted to feel the world's edges. The fog was lifting, revealing ripples of light on the water. I stood by the rail, watching the boats drift in slow, deliberate lines. A woman nearby was sketching in a small notebook. Her lines were loose, messy, alive. I found myself leaning slightly, curious about what she was drawing. She noticed me looking and smiled. "Light falls differently on days like this," she said, nodding toward the water. I returned her smile. "Yeah, it does." She went back to sketching, and I watched the waves with a softer awareness. Maybe she was right. Maybe the light hadn't changed. Maybe I had. When I returned to the office, Jana called me into her glass-walled room. I braced myself. She folded her hands on her desk, expression polite in that tight-knit way she mastered. "I noticed you've been distracted." Her words came out measured, as though she was choosing each one carefully to maintain dominance. "Not distracted," I said calmly, "just more focused on the right things." Her eyebrows rose, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. For years, I responded to her with apologies, hesitations, careful obedience. But today, something in me refused to shrink back into that mold. "Well," she said slowly, "the client likes your revisions. They want to see more options from you." Her praise was clipped, but it didn't matter. I accepted it without letting it define me. "Thank you," I replied, then added, "I'll work on some new ideas." When I left her office, something subtle had shifted in me. I didn't need her validation. I wasn't hungry for her approval. I wasn't even afraid of her disapproval. I was simply here, alive, capable, and it felt like inhaling after holding my breath for years. By late afternoon, Elias stopped by my desk again. "Got a moment?" he asked. We walked back to his workspace. He showed me more concept sketches, daring dyes, bold shadows, unexpected compositions. His art felt like motion, like honesty, like trying even if the world wasn't ready. "You see things quietly," he said. "But you see." I didn't know how to answer. Instead, I pointed to a corner of one sketch, suggesting a softer shadow to balance the composition. His smile widened. "Exactly." As the day ended, he handed me a small square piece of thick sketch paper. "Keep this," he said. "It reminded me of something you said yesterday, the way the world feels different when you open a window." I looked down at the sketch. It was a simple drawing of a window frame open, a breeze sweeping in, leaves swirling from the outside. My throat tightened. "You drew this last night?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. Couldn't stop thinking about that idea. I tucked the sketch gently into my notebook. On the walk home, I felt lighter, not because of him, but because of me. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen in a way that wasn't romanticized or misunderstood. Seen as someone with depth, with potential, with edges that didn't need smoothing. Back at my attic apartment, the sky had turned a muted gold. The window I opened 2 days ago was still tilted slightly, letting in the evening breeze. I approached it slowly, the air cool against my skin. The city hummed below. People walked home from work, their laughter echoing up through the street. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A train rumbled faintly, life unfolding in steady waves. I leaned against the sill. For the first time in a long time, I felt emotion. I whispered into the quiet, "I think I'm changing." The wind slipped inside again, soft and certain as if to answer. The next morning arrived with a pale gold light, seeping through my curtains, the kind of gentle brightness that feels like an invitation rather than an interruption. I opened my eyes slowly, letting the day come into focus. The air drifting through the slightly open window was cool, carrying the faint scent of sea salt and early winter. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to get out of bed. I lay there, listening to the city's quiet murmurs, to my own breathing, to the soft hum inside me that felt almost like a new rhythm forming. A rhythm that belonged to me. When I finally stood, the floorboards creaked under my feet, familiar but somehow less oppressive. I made tea, wrapped my hands around the mug, and stood by the open window. The street below was waking delivery trucks, a cyclist, an elderly couple walking slowly with matching scarves. Yet everything felt different, as though I were watching the world from a new vantage point, one a little higher, a little clearer. I walked to work feeling strangely grounded, as if there were weight beneath each step, but not the heavy kind, the kind that anchors you instead of burying you. Inside the office, I felt eyes on me, not in a critical way, but in a curious one. It was as if people sensed something they couldn't name, the subtle change in my posture, the quiet confidence I didn't yet fully understand, but was slowly growing into. At my desk, I opened the new layout I had been working on. The colors looked richer today, the brush strokes softer, the composition more honest. As I refined a small detail, a tap on my shoulder made me look up. Elias, you busy? He asked. Not too much, I replied. Come with me. I want to show you something. My heartbeat flickered with surprise, but followed him without hesitation. He led me to the small concept room near the back of the office. The walls were covered with pinned sketches, swatches, and half-formed ideas. On the table in the center, he had placed several new boards, layouts, color palettes, mood sketches. This is the pitch I'm presenting next week, he said, and I want your feedback before anyone else's. I blinked. Why me? He exhaled softly, as if the answer were obvious. Because you see things, he said. Because you're not afraid to look deeper. And because every time you trust your instinct, it's better than what you think it is. His confidence in me unsettled something old and brittle inside my chest, something I hadn't realized was still alive. We spent the next hour talking about light, tone, balance, about the difference between a design that was attractive and one that was felt. Elias listened with the kind of attention that made my thoughts feel sharper, more valuable. I found myself speaking without rehearsing, without shrinking. At one point he laughed softly. You're holding back less, he said. Maybe I'm learning how not to, I replied. His eyes softened in a way that made the room feel warmer. Good. Back at my desk, I worked with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Not the tight, anxious focus that comes from fear, but the expansive kind that comes from purpose. Around midday, Johnny approached me again, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. I braced myself, but there was something different in her expression today, less dismissive, more uncertain. I sent your new layout to the client, she said. They chose it. I blinked. They did. Yes, they said it felt fresh, thoughtful, alive. Their words, not mine. I didn't gasp. I didn't shrink. I didn't dissolve into gratitude I didn't owe her. Instead, I nodded. Thank you for letting me know. She waited for something from me, maybe enthusiasm, maybe obedience, but when I gave her neither, she moved on. The shift was quiet, but enormous. After work, instead of going straight home, I walked to the small bookstore near the waterfront, the one with dusty windows, and a bell above the door that chimed softly when I entered. The warmth inside wrapped around me like a blanket. Rows of old books lined the walls, smelling faintly of paper and possibility. I ran my fingers along the spines, blues, browns, deep maroons. I stopped at a shelf of poetry and pulled out a book with a worn cover. A passage caught my eye. Sometimes your life changes while you're simply looking at the light on the floor. My chest tightened. It felt like the universe whispering something I had been too afraid to say aloud. I bought the book. Outside, the sky had softened into a muted gray blue, the breeze carrying the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I walked slowly, wanting the air, the quiet, the space. When I reached the waterfront, I leaned against the rail, watching the waves roll in with a slow, steady rhythm. For years, I thought I needed a dramatic push to change my life. But standing there, I realized something quieter and truer. Change often begins in silence. In the moments when you choose yourself over the expectations that shaped you. In the breath you decide to take a little deeper. In the window you open without asking permission. My phone buzzed. A message from Elias. Elias, you free tonight? I found a little art cafe near Pine Street. Thought you might like it. I hesitated not out of fear, but out of wonder. My old self would have declined, retreated, folded back into safety. But safety had been a slow disappearance, and I wasn't disappearing anymore. I typed back, yes. Tell me the time. When I reached home, the window was still open, letting the cool evening air drift lightly across my apartment. I set the poetry book on my desk, its presence warm and comforting. I stood by the window again, resting my palms on the frame. The city glowed beneath me, streetlights, car headlights, faint reflections in rain-slicked pavement. All of it felt like an unread message. I breathed in deeply, letting the air fill every corner of me. And as the breeze touched my cheek in its soft, unhurried way, I realized something vital. The world wasn't whispering anymore. It was calling. And this time, I was finally answering. The art cafe Elias mentioned was tucked between a florist and an old record shop on Pine Street, easy to miss unless you were looking for something quiet, warm, and a little strange in the best way. When I arrived, the sky had already tipped into dusk, a soft lavender haze settling over the rooftops. The streetlights flickered on one by one, glowing like thoughtful punctuation marks in the evening. The cafe's exterior was painted a faded teal, the sign handwritten, almost shy, light, and lines. It felt like a place built for people who lived half inside their heads and half in the world. Inside, the air smelled faintly of espresso, paint, and jasmine. Fairy lights draped across the ceiling like loose constellations. Soft indie music drifted from the speakers, blending with murmured conversations and the clinking of ceramic mugs. Elias sat near the back, a sketchbook open in front of him, steam rising from a cup of chamomile tea. When he saw me, he stood, a quiet smile shifting across his face, warm, not expectant. You came, he said gently. Of course I did, I replied. He pulled out the chair for me, a small, thoughtful gesture I didn't realize I needed until that very moment. We ordered drinks. I chose something I'd never tried before, a rose latte. The barista sprinkled dried petals on top, and when I inhaled the scent, it felt like stepping into a garden at dusk. For a while, Elias and I talked about simple things: light, color, the odd comfort of fog, why humans are so drawn to windows, and unfinished stories. His presence felt calming, like standing beside a warm lamp on a cold night. Then he said something that shifted the air between us. You've changed more this week than some people do in a year. I felt my breath catch. It doesn't feel like change, more like remembering. He nodded slowly. Remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. The words hit something deep. I looked down at my latte, tracing the rim with my finger. I didn't realize how much I had dimmed myself. You didn't dim, he said softly. You adapted. But adaptation isn't the same as belonging. The honesty of it made my chest ache, not painfully, but in a way that felt like something breaking open, letting light in. Do you ever wonder, I asked, how much of your life you've lived in silence without noticing? All the time, he answered, but the moment you notice, that's when the volume starts to rise. A silence settled between us, comfortable, not fragile. After a moment, he nudged his sketchbook toward me. Look, he said. I turned it around. On the page was a drawing of a woman standing by an open window. Her hair lifted in the breeze, her posture soft but steady, as though she were listening to something distant and important. The light fell across her face in a way that made her look both vulnerable and unmistakably alive. It was me. Not literally, but unmistakably. You draw people the way you see them, I murmured. And I see you learning to breathe again, he replied. Something warm pressed against my ribs. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition. Not of him, but of myself. We talked until the cafe emptied, until the barista dimmed the lights, until the fairy lights twinkled like sleepy stars. When we finally stepped outside, the night was cool and clear, the air carrying the scent of the ocean even this far inland. Elias walked me halfway home, our breaths visible in the cold. We didn't touch, not because we were holding back, but because the moment wasn't asking for it. Something quieter, gentler, more respectful was unfolding. At the corner of my street, he stopped. Isabella, he said softly, you don't have to rush anything, but I want you to know, it's a privilege to witness someone find their voice. My throat tightened. I'm still learning what it sounds like, and I'm not here to shape it, he said, only to hear it. The sincerity in his voice felt like a warm hand on my shoulder, supportive, not controlling. Rare. Real. We said goodnight, and I walked the last few blocks alone. But I didn't feel alone. The night felt strangely alive around me, like the city was breathing with me, quietly matching my pace. When I reached my apartment, I climbed the stairs slowly, not wanting to break the delicate clarity of the evening. The open window greeted me with a soft gust of cool air. My room was dim, lit only by the glow of the street lamps outside, casting long shadows across the floor. I set my bag down, removed my coat, and walked directly to the window. The breeze slipped in, brushing against my face with a familiarity that made me close my eyes. For a long moment, I said nothing. I simply stood there, breathing in the night, feeling myself settle into a version of me that was finally beginning to feel whole. I thought about the week I'd had, how quietly everything had shifted, like a tide rising in small increments until suddenly the shoreline was different. How many years I'd lived in other people's definitions of me. How much of myself I had stored away in corners. But now there was movement inside me, steady, gentle, unmistakably mine. I whispered into the open air, not for anyone else to hear, but because saying it aloud made it real. I'm not fading anymore. The words surprised me. Not because they were bold, but because they were true. The window frame was cold under my palms. The city hummed softly below. A distant siren wailed once and disappeared. A couple laughed somewhere down the street. A dog barked twice, then silence. Life moving around me. Life moving within me. For the first time, I felt like I was standing in the center of my own story, not as a background character, not as an echo, but as someone with a voice that had shape, texture, direction, a voice that was finally rising. The night breeze slipped across my skin again, gentle and affirming, like a quiet reply, keep going. And I knew I would. Not because of anyone else, not because of fear, not because the world expected it, but because the world was calling me now, clearly, directly, and this time I had the courage to answer in my own voice. The next morning felt strangely weightless, as if the air itself had been rinsed clean overnight. I opened my eyes to a quiet that wasn't empty, quiet that felt expectant, like a pause before someone says your name. I stretched slowly, letting my body ease into the day instead of bracing for it. The window was still open from the night before. A cool breeze drifted in, brushing across my cheek the way a gentle hand might wake someone kindly. For a moment, I simply lay there, listening to the soft hum of the world outside, the distant gulls, the muted whistle of an early morning bus, the faint rustling of leaves against the brick wall beside my building. There was a steadiness inside me now, not loud, not dramatic, just steady, like someone had finally tightened a loose thread I'd been holding for years. I made tea, wrapped my sweater around me, and stood by the window as steam curled upward. The street below was just beginning to wake. A young woman in a yellow coat jogged past. A delivery man unloaded crates of oranges. A shopkeeper lifted the shutters of his bakery. Little rituals of life unfolding without hesitation. And for the first time, I felt myself belonging to that rhythm, not as a shadow, not as an observer, but as someone slowly becoming part of the living. When I arrived at work, the office felt different, not because anything had changed, but because I had. People greeted me with a little more warmth, or maybe I finally noticed it. I took off my coat, placed my notebook on my desk, and sat down with a quiet confidence that didn't ask for permission. A few minutes later, a message appeared on my screen. Elias, morning. I left something for you in the concept room. My heart shifted, not in the dramatic, breathless way I used to imagine change would feel, but in a grounded way, like a foot stepping onto a new piece of earth. I walked to the concept room. On the center table, a small white envelope lay waiting. My name was written on it in soft pencil. Inside was a single sketch, a woman standing at a shoreline at dawn. Her posture was open, her hair caught in a breeze, her expression turned toward the horizon. Not searching, not longing, simply ready. Below it, in tiny handwriting, the moment you begin choosing yourself. My breath caught, not because of him but because of the truth of it. As I slipped the sketch back into the envelope, someone stepped into the room behind me. Jana, I need to talk to you, she said. Her tone held its usual sharpness, but something about her posture was softer today, less rigid. I followed her to her glass-walled office. She closed the door, folded her arms, and studied me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've been different this week, she said. I waited. At first I thought it was a phase, but your work, the quality, the clarity, it's changed. Her voice wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either. It hovered somewhere in the middle, uncertain. I don't know what happened, she continued, but you're producing some of the strongest concepts we've had in months. I nodded, unsure what to say. I'm not trying to flatter you, she added quickly, but I do need to understand something. Her gaze sharpened slightly. What shifted? For years, that question would have terrified me. I would have scrambled to explain myself, to soften myself, to make myself understandable so that no one mistook my growth for rebellion. But today, the truth felt simple. I stopped being afraid of my own ideas, I said. Her eyes flickered surprise, confusion, maybe even respect, though she covered it quickly. Well, she said, clearing her throat. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The clients are responding. She dismissed me with a small nod. But as I walked out, I didn't feel small like I used to after leaving her office. I felt grounded, present. Steady. Back at my desk, I opened a new layout file, letting intuition guide my choices. Colors I used to avoid, brush strokes I used to second guess, layers I used to delete. The work felt freer now, like breathing. In the afternoon, Elias stopped by my desk. Did you see it? He asked. The sketch. I nodded. Yes. He studied my face, and it felt right, I said softly, like something I didn't know I needed to see. He exhaled slowly, relief shadowing his smile. Good. A pause settled between us, gentle, warm. Then he added, you don't realize how much of your light you used to hide. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, not embarrassment, but recognition. I think I'm learning to stop doing that, I said. He nodded, eyes soft. You are. The rest of the workday passed quietly, but something had shifted in the air. People looked at me differently, not as the girl who blended into the background, but as someone finally taking up the space she had always deserved. When evening arrived, I walked home through the glowing streets, the lamplight stretching across the pavement like warm shadows. My breath fogged in the cold air, but my chest felt warm. At home, as always. I went straight to the window, but tonight, I didn't just stand there. I stepped closer, placed both hands on the sill, and leaned forward into the cool wind. The sky above was deep blue, almost purple, and the city's hum felt softer, more patient, like it was waiting for me. I whispered, as if the night could hold it. I'm listening now. And I was. To the world, to myself, to the quiet voice that had been speaking inside me for years, waiting for me to stop dimming it. The breeze pressed against my skin in the gentlest way, like a conversation, like an answer, like a promise. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt alive. It felt like something I had earned. The next day began with a softness I couldn't quite name, an inner steadiness that felt as though the ground beneath me had grown wider overnight. I woke before my alarm again, not out of anxiety, but because something inside me was quietly awake, ready, open. For a long moment, I lay still, listening to the faint hum of the radiator and the distant sound of the city waking up. My open window let in the scent of cold air, ocean wind, and pine, the kind of scent that reminds you you're alive in quiet ways. After tea, I stood at the window and breathed in deeply. The street below was washed in a pale gold glow. People walked with purpose, dogs tugged on leashes, and the sky held a delicate layer of morning mist that softened the city's edges. I felt grounded, as if a part of me that had always drifted was finally beginning to land. When I reached the office, something unusual was happening. A small crowd had gathered near the center of the room around the main bulletin board. I set my bag down and approached slowly, unsure what I would find. Pinned at the top was a large printed email from the perfume client containing a paragraph highlighted in yellow. We are particularly impressed with the atmospheric concept by Isabella Rowan. There is a quiet emotional depth in her composition that feels modern, intimate, and visually compelling. We would like to use her direction for the full campaign. My heart didn't race. Instead, something inside me settled, like a breath finally reaching the deepest part of my lungs. People murmured. Someone clapped softly. Another coworker smiled at me with a small nod, as though acknowledging something long overdue. Jean approached, heels clicking against the polished floor. Well, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Congratulations. Not warm, not cold, just honest. Thank you, I replied. That was it. No shrinking, no anxious smile, no apologetic tone. Just a simple truth exchanged. I returned to my desk and felt the weight of something invisible lift from my shoulders. I had spent years wondering if my work meant anything. Today, I didn't need to wonder. Around mid-morning, Elias appeared beside me, holding 2 mugs of tea. Thought you might be getting a lot of eyes on you today, he said. Tea helps. I took the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. Thank you. He leaned against the side of my desk. How does it feel? I exhaled slowly. Not like I expected. I thought it would feel loud, heavy, but it feels like space, good space? He asked. Yes, I said. Finally. He smiled, not wide, but softly, like someone quietly cheering for you from the front row of your life. By the way, he added, the creative director wants to see your concept boards this afternoon. You should prepare. A small flutter moved through me, but not fear, anticipation. When lunchtime arrived, I stepped out into the bright, cold air. The sunlight reflected off the wet sidewalks, turning everything into shimmering silver. I walked along the waterfront path, letting the rhythmic pull of the tide calm whatever nerves lingered inside me. A woman stood nearby, painting the horizon with soft brush strokes. Her canvas was filled with muted blues and pale golds, the same palette I had used in my campaign design. I watched her for a moment, mesmerized by how her hand moved with instinct, not hesitation. She noticed me and smiled. Light is different today, isn't it? It is, I said, returning the smile. Feels like it's leaning toward us instead of away. She nodded. Some days are like that. As I walked back to the office, her words stayed with me. Some days are like that. Days when the world tilts just a few degrees in your direction. By the time I arrived, the creative director was waiting in the glass conference room. I entered with my notebook and a quiet, steady heart. He flipped through my work in silence at first, expression unreadable. Then he looked up. This is strong, Isabella, he said. Delicate but intentional. It feels lived in, emotional. I want more of this from you. His tone wasn't patronizing. It wasn't performative. It was straightforward, encouraging. I can do more, I said. I know, he replied. When the meeting ended, I walked back to my desk feeling taller, not physically, but internally, as though my spine had found a new shape. The rest of the day passed with a calm productivity I'd never known before. Not frantic perfectionism. Not self-doubt curled around every decision. Just work. Honest, grounded, intentional work. In the evening, as the office emptied and the lights dimmed, Elias appeared again. How did it go? He asked. Good, I said. It felt right. He nodded. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, not romantic, not possessive, but proud in a way that made my chest warm. Come on, he said gently. Let me walk you out. We stepped into the golden dusk together. The city glowed soft, the streetlights flickering, windows shining, the air cool against my skin. We walked in comfortable silence until we reached the corner, where our paths split. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. Thank you for seeing me, I replied. Always, he said. But you're starting to see yourself. That's the part that matters. We parted ways, and I walked home with a slow, thoughtful pace. Every footstep felt like a small declaration inside my apartment. The window greeted me with a gentle rush of evening air. I walked toward it instinctively, resting my palms on the frame. The sky was streaked with deep blue and pale rose. The city murmured below, alive and patient. I whispered into the open air. I am stepping into myself now. The breeze brushed my cheek in reply, soft, certain. For the first time in my life, I felt the world shifting toward me instead of away. And the most surprising part, I was ready for it. The next day carried a strange clarity with it, like the city had been washed in a thin layer of silver light. I woke to the smell of cold air drifting through the open window, my curtains fluttering softly like they were breathing with me. The morning felt honest. That was the only word that came to mind. Honest. In the way that nothing pretended to be anything louder or brighter than it was. Honest, in the way I felt inside myself, steady, grounded, awake in ways I hadn't been for years. I made tea, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and stood by the window longer than usual. The street below was slowly stretching into motion, the bakery opening its shutters. A cyclist gliding past, the morning bus sighing to a stop. Everything felt familiar, and yet I felt like I was meeting it again for the first time. At work. The shift was noticeable not because people treated me differently, but because I treated myself differently. I didn't shrink into corners or soften my presence to fit old expectations. I moved with intention. I spoke without rehearsing. I offered ideas without apologizing for them. And strangely, people responded, not with shock, not with resistance, just with quiet acceptance. as if I had always been allowed to take up this space and simply never realized it. Around noon, the creative director stopped by my desk. "We want you to co-lead the next concept pitch," he said, almost casually, as though it wasn't an enormous shift in my role. For a moment, the old version of me flickered small, doubtful, hesitant. But the new version of me, the one who had grown through open windows and quiet courage, rose instead. "I'd be glad to," I said. He nodded once. "Good. You're ready. Ready. Not almost. Not with support. Just ready." His certainty steadied something inside me even further. Later, Elias found me in the break area, pouring chamomile tea. "I heard," he said with a soft smile. "Co-lead." I shrugged lightly, though inside it felt like a small sun had ignited. "It feels surreal." "No," he replied gently. "It feels earned." The warmth in his voice wasn't about admiration. It was recognition, the kind that doesn't demand anything, doesn't define you, doesn't ask you to change. The kind that simply says, "I see you." Clearly. We talked for a few minutes about colors, about light, about how fog always makes the world feel like it's pausing to think. And then we returned to our work parallel, steady, comfortable. The afternoon passed quickly. I found myself absorbed in designing new layouts, textures that breathed, shadows that spoke, colors that felt like emotions rather than instructions. Every stroke felt freer now, shaped not by fear of being wrong, but by curiosity about what could be right. When the office quieted near evening, I packed my bag and stepped outside. The sky had already slipped into blue dusk, the street lamps glowing softly like tiny moons suspended above the sidewalk. I walked without rushing, letting the cool air graze my skin, letting the day settle inside me. At the waterfront, the tide was coming in waves folding over each other in gentle layers. I leaned on the railing and watched the horizon darken slowly, the last traces of sunlight dissolving into the water. Everything felt suspended, held gently between day and night, between who I had been and who I was becoming. A breeze brushed my cheek. It felt like a quiet nudge. Move forward. I closed my eyes, letting the wind settle into my lungs, letting the cold sting of salt and air carve out a little more room inside me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something: approval, permission, clarity. I felt like someone steering, someone choosing, someone stepping into her own life with intention rather than hesitation. On the walk home, I passed the little bookstore where I'd bought the poetry book. Its lights glowed warmly. Inside, someone was rearranging a shelf. The smell of old paper leaked through the open door. I paused for a moment, simply taking it in. Somewhere deep inside, a thought surfaced. This is who I was meant to become all along: someone who opens windows and doesn't close them again. When I reached my apartment, I climbed the stairs slowly, savoring each moment. My room felt warm, familiar, not because it was small, but because I finally felt big inside it. I set my bag down and walked straight to the open window. The night breeze greeted me like an old friend. I rested my palms on the sill, leaning forward just slightly, watching the city glow in soft amber and pale white lights. Cars moved like quiet shadows. A couple walked hand in hand across the street. Someone in the building opposite laughed with their window open wide. The world felt alive, and I felt alive with it. I whispered into the night, not asking, not doubting, but declaring, "I choose forward." The breeze slipped across my face, gentle and certain, almost like agreement. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving my chest in a steady stream. It felt like releasing an entire version of myself I no longer needed. For the first time in my life, the future didn't feel like a distant concept. It felt close, near, touchable. And the most surprising part was this: I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The morning of the pitch arrived with a sky so clear it looked almost unreal, pale blue brushed, with faint streaks of rose. I woke quietly, slowly, as if my body already knew this day mattered in ways I didn't need to explain. My window was open, the breeze drifting in like a soft, familiar companion. I stood before it for a long moment, letting the cool air touch my skin, letting my breath match the world instead of racing against it. There was no fear in my chest, no doubt, just a steady pulse, a grounding certainty that felt like finally standing inside the center of myself, rather than on the edges. I dressed simply: soft gray sweater, black trousers, hair loosely tied back because I liked the way the wind always found stray strands anyway. I looked at my reflection only once, not to fix anything, just to acknowledge the woman staring back. She wasn't small anymore. She wasn't dim. She wasn't waiting for approval. She was here, present, awake. When I reached the office, the conference room was already half full. People murmured quietly, flipping through printouts, adjusting their laptops, sipping weak coffee from paper cups. Jana moved around with her usual brisk efficiency, but something in her posture felt less guarded today, as if even she sensed that the environment had tilted, expanded, changed. Elias was at the far end of the table, leaning slightly against the wall, sketchbook in his hands. When our eyes met, he didn't smile widely, just a small, quiet softening that felt like a steadying anchor. "You ready?" he asked when I reached him. "I think I've been ready for longer than I realized," I said. "Good," he whispered. "Then let's do this." The meeting began. The client team entered, two women in tailored coats, one man with silver-rimmed glasses. They shook hands, settled in, and waited. Jana opened the session with her usual sharp precision. But when it was time for the concept presentation, she didn't step forward. She looked at me. "Isabella will lead us through the campaign," she said. "Her vision is the foundation of this project." I inhaled once, deeply, steadily. Then I stood. The room quieted. The projector hummed softly. And for the first time in my professional life, I spoke without shrinking. I walked them through each frame, each detail, not defensively, not timidly, just honestly. I told them about the light, the atmosphere, the soft contrasts, the emotional tone behind the composition. I spoke about intention rather than expectation, about feeling rather than formula. About the quiet spaces where meaning lives without noise. Halfway through, I felt something shift, not in the room, but in me. A release, a settling, a kind of belonging that didn't need applause or approval to feel real. I wasn't performing anymore. I was inhabiting. When I finished, the room remained still for a beat, longer than comfortable, but not tense. A contemplative silence. Then one of the clients leaned forward. "This," she said, tapping the layout, "feels like breath, like something people will carry with them." Her partner nodded. "It's intimate, lived in. You've given the brand a soul." Something warm spread through my chest, not excitement, not vanity, just a quiet peace. The meeting ended with firm nods and sincere handshakes. As the clients left, the creative director gave me a subtle, approving tilt of his head. Johnny approached, her expression unreadable. "You did good work," she said simply. It wasn't effusive. It wasn't softened, but it was real. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need anything more than that. When the room finally emptied, Elias remained beside me. "You were yourself," he said softly. It was powerful. I felt the air settle around us, warm and calm. I didn't know it could feel like that. I admitted. "You didn't change today," he said. "You just stepped into the part of you that's been waiting." We walked out together, but parted near the stairs. No promises, no unnecessary words. Just the comfort of someone who had seen me grow and didn't try to shape me. The walk home felt like walking through a world I had rewoven. The city hummed with the quiet aliveness, streetlights flickering, the scent of coffee drifting from open cafe doors, a soft breeze brushing my hair. I paused at the waterfront again. The tide was high and glowing with afternoon sunlight. A few children laughed nearby, tossing breadcrumbs to gulls. Two elderly men played checkers at a worn wooden table. Life moving in rhythms I felt part of now. I watched the horizon for a long time, letting the pull of the tide mirror the pull inside me. Then I walked home, up the stairs, into my apartment, toward my window. When I reached it, I didn't just stand there. I stepped closer until the cool evening air wrapped around me like a beginning rather than an escape. The city below glowed softly, lights flickering in their own language. Someone across the street played music faintly. A woman walked her dog. A teenager skated down the sidewalk, laughing into the wind. Life unfolding. Life available. Life waiting. I pressed my palms to the window frame. I had entered this week uncertain, invisible, diluted by fear and habit. And yet from a window, from a breeze, from a quiet shift inside myself, I had become someone different. Not louder, not hardened, not perfect. Just truer. "I'm not living small anymore," I whispered. The words didn't tremble. They landed. A breeze swept in, cool, steady, almost like a yes. I closed my eyes. In that moment, I didn't feel like a woman stepping into a metaphor. I felt like a woman stepping into her life. Not someday, not when ready, not when approved. Now, here, fully. I opened my eyes and looked at the horizon, the city, the sky, the shifting light. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt this truth settle in my bones. I was no longer waiting to be found. I was finally choosing my own beginning.